TEDxRoxbury. So, what is the face of youth homelessness? It's a face we're probably familiar with, but not exactly aware of. Youth homelessness is somewhat of a hidden crisis. And yet, according to the Annie Casey Foundation, 1 in 10 youth and young adults under the age of 25 within just a year will experience it. And to be clear, they didn't bring this on themselves. They've had it forced on them by others who, for whatever reason, have absconded from their responsibility to help, to support, and to love these young people. The problem is overwhelming, and it is heartbreaking. But the solution is actually very close to home. You see, youth and young adult homelessness is actually a result of rupture in community. So I believe that we can actually resolve it with something that we're already really good at: community. After all, that is what saved me. So it was a little bit after my high school graduation, just before my 18th birthday, and I was busy making plans and preparations to attend university. I had not had the mentoring, I had not had the modeling, and I certainly had not had the means to get there. So college admission was a huge accomplishment for me. They had sat me down. They said, okay, you want to go to college, but we just want you to know you won't receive any support from us. But I had made it. And right at the start of my freshman year in college, I would need to find somewhere else to live. I would need to leave my home. Now, it probably goes without saying that this catapulted me into a frenzy of survival. How was I going to continue my classes? I had just started them. Where was I going to go? How was I going to get my stuff? And then someone stepped in. A woman who I hadn't even met, who I didn't know and who didn't know me, opened the doors to her home, and she invited me to come and live with her. Darlene. She had 4 girls of all ages, and her house really just felt like home. She worked. She kept the household running, and yet there was always time for a pleasant conversation with me at the kitchen table. Their father also treated me like one of their own. So I would try to practice my college-level Spanish with him. I thought I was so clever. So I approached him, and I just said, okay, here's what we're going to do, because I couldn't hold a conversation. So I said, you speak to me in Spanish, I'll respond in English. And he was just like, no, Asjah, that's awkward. Tienes que practicar si quieres mejorar. You have to practice if you're going to get better. And then he would also teach me other lessons, too. There was a moment where I received a bouquet of flowers an unexpected bouquet of flowers, from an admirer sent to the house. And he saw them, and then, he just kind of cautioned me. He said, if you're going to think about getting in a relationship, you want to make sure you ask a lot of questions. In life, you have to ask questions to figure out the true nature of things. And so, some years later, it would be a while, I would understand the significance of this lesson of how someone's life can be impacted by the questions that are asked, or in some cases, not asked. I would love to tell you about a young man I had the pleasure of working with named James. James was whimsical. He was intellectual. He was very much a creative. He would just saunter around, engaging people in conversation, and he was always pushing for policies and changes that would help protect others from harm. And this sometimes did put him at odds with others who really just felt like, he's just too much sometimes. But where others saw someone who was too much, I really just saw a natural-born leader. And so the moment came, we were able to get him an apartment. We were able to get him into a place, and I was so happy. And so we sat down, we were completing the paperwork and, just having pleasant conversation. And he was so happy, he just showed me all of his artwork on his Instagram page. And he talked to me about the Romantic period and Impressionism. Knew nothing about it then, know nothing about it now. But it was a great conversation. And, he just said, Miss Asjah, thank you. I know it was so hard to get me into a place. And it had been hard, but it was so worth it, and I would have done it over and over again if need be. And so now that James was in a place, I could rest easy knowing that he was off the streets and that he was safe. And so I could move on to other things. And so I embarked on a new journey to establish a nonprofit that could potentially help youth and young adults in a way that kept them in the driver's seat of their own lives and of their own decision-making where they belong. But truthfully, if I'm being honest, I still had some lingering doubts about whether or not this venture was the thing I wanted to do, whether or not this was the thing that I really wanted to risk it all for. One afternoon, my phone rang, and it was the number of my former colleague, and I wondered what he might be calling about. I answered, and he just, hi, how are you? What are you doing right now? And I gave him the typical small talk reply. Okay, well, I just wanted to make sure this is a good time. I have some news for you. News about what? It's about James. James was found next to his building yesterday, unresponsive. James is gone. I think you could have filled the space on that call with an eternity as the realization hung in the air. The realization that something so permanent, so final had just occurred. James was gone, and the loss was devastating. This loss was punctuated by the knowledge that something like this should never have happened. And also the lingering question of whether or not I could have done more. And so I cried for what seemed like forever and a day. Because here's the thing, I believe that James, the part of the reason why he worked so hard to look out for all of us and, really just wanted to make sure that we were gonna be all right, was because he didn't want anyone to live with the shame and the guilt. No, I'm sorry, not the guilt, but the loneliness and the difficulty that he lived with every day. If we think about James's reality, he lived unprotected. It was a house with no walls. It was a location with no address. It could be a dimly lit avenue one night and perhaps a creaky shelter mattress the next. And James deserved better than that. So I had the opportunity to go to the memorial service, and while there, I spoke with a family member of his who had been really involved with him in trying to get him stabilized, and they said something that really helped to change everything for me. They said, I know for a fact that if there was just one person who was there with him to navigate through everything with him, things would have been different. I think he would have made it. And, that is actually the moment when everything changed for me. Because indecision at that point could no longer be an option for me. As far as it depended on me, there could never be another James. And so I doubled down on my commitment to establish this nonprofit and to get it up and running. And so, again, the question is, what is the face of youth homelessness? So we know now that it's my face. It's also James's face. But it's also the face of so many other youth and young adults that we know or have known. I can tell you all about the faces that inspire me. I really wish we had the time, but for now, I'll just leave you with this. All of us together, we can solve this thing that we call youth and young adult homelessness. And Darlene's moment in my life is proof of how a young person, a young adult, if someone steps in on their behalf, they can keep their appointment with destiny. And so, I know that all of you have it within you to be community for someone who needs it, and that can look like any variety of things. It can look like mentoring, it can look like modeling, it can look like means. Consider doing a few things. Consider supporting a youth-serving organization that relies on supports like mentoring and coaching. You could volunteer, or you could give directly to an organization like this. You could also give directly to a youth or young adult who you know needs some extra support in that way. Another possibility is perhaps open your home as a host home on a temporary basis for a youth or young adult who might need somewhere to be. And then just consider being a good community member and establishing one-to-one relationships with youth or young adults who you don't really know what their situation is. It could very well be that they are, in fact, experiencing homelessness. And so since youth and young adults, they're gonna be our future business people, artists, service providers, they're gonna be our future, essentially. That's a fact. And so when I think about the future, I actually have a vision, and I can see it with my mind's eye. I see some faces. I see their faces. They're living, they're thriving and succeeding. And I see some other ones. I see your faces, and I also see mine, and I see them all together. In short, I see the community. And it is with love and with radical community that we're gonna be able to help youth and young adults come in from the cold. Thank you.